My chocolate pecan pie recipe is the best because I make it without corn syrup, so it's not as sweet. Together with cocoa powder and oven roasted pecans, it's the perfect dessert for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or just any time of the year. The most important ingredient in this recipe is the pecans, so let's go over the pecans first. I am using 1.5 cups or 170 grams of chopped pecans. You could use whole pecans, but a lot of people say that using whole pecans in a pie makes the pie hard to cut. So that's why I prefer to use chopped. I roasted these pecans to really bring out the flavor. What I did is I took a baking sheet, in my case, a pizza pan. I did not put any oil on it, no butter. It was totally dry. I put the pecans on the baking sheet and I baked them uncovered at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 minutes. Then I took them out of the oven, stirred them, put them back in for 3 minutes. Then I took them out and then I stirred them and I put them into the bowl. Although you definitely could just open a bag of chopped pecans and make a pie that way, it would still be good, but honestly, roasting the pecans is really going to take this pie to the next level and make it the best. The cocoa powder is very important in this chocolate pecan pie recipe as well. I am using 4 tablespoons, a quarter of a cup, or 20 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder. The other ingredients are a bit more standard for a pecan pie. Here I have 6 tablespoons of butter. I use the other 2 to make my 9-inch pie crust. You don't have to make it homemade. You could, of course, buy a pie crust. I have 1 cup or 240 grams of light brown sugar. It's actually mostly light brown, but a little bit of dark because I ran out of light brown. I think it'll be fine. 2 large eggs, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. The first step is to melt the butter, so I'll do this in the microwave. Chocolate pecan pie is one of the easiest pie recipes that you can make because now that my butter is melted and my oven is preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, all I have to do is throw everything into the mixing bowl. Here I have my pecans, my cocoa powder. I am just going to literally mix everything together and then I'm going to pour it into my unbaked pie shell. If you want to par bake your pie shell for maybe 5 minutes at 350, just to ensure that it's crispier, it's on the crispier side, you could, but honestly, I think it's going to be fine. Now I'm just going to add the 2 eggs, the vanilla, and the salt. I waited to add the eggs because I didn't want the hot butter to accidentally start cooking the eggs. But I've started mixing the butter into the sugar, so honestly, I don't think I'm going to have a problem with the eggs cooking. I don't even need a mixer. I'm just going to mix everything to combine. Like I said, this recipe is super easy. I just stirred the filling for not even a minute and now it's ready. I'm going to pour the filling into the pie shell. Like I said earlier, if you want to make sure that it's on the crispy side, you could par bake it. I would take a fork and just prick it here and there, maybe 7 or 8 times, and bake it empty at 350 for 5 minutes. But honestly, I think it's going to be fine. So all I'm going to do now is, like I said, just pour my filling into the pie shell, and I'm going to bake this uncovered for 45 minutes. I poured the filling into the pie shell. I took my spoon and just smoothed it out here and there so that it's even. Now my pie is ready for the oven. One thing I did want to point out is that I recommend you put your pie on a cookie sheet or a pizza pan, something like that, so that if it does boil over, it doesn't get onto the floor of your oven. I just pulled my pie out of the oven. It was in at 350, uncovered, for 45 minutes. Even though it was hard to resist the temptation, as always, I waited for the pie to cool down completely before cutting it. My chocolate pecan pie was delicious. Just like with my normal pecan pie recipe, there is a nice contrast in textures between the toasted top and the gooey center. Although I think that you could use a variety of sweeteners, making this chocolate pecan pie without corn syrup and instead using brown sugar was a great call. Brown sugar is in almost every chocolate chip cookie recipe, so it makes sense to use it in a recipe that calls for cocoa powder. And of course, the two main stars of this recipe, the pecans and the chocolate, came through very nicely. I could definitely tell that I had roasted the pecans before adding them to the pie because the flavor was so amplified. Honestly, even though I think you definitely could make this pie without roasting the pecans first, I think you probably should, because if you don't, I think the pecans would have a hard time competing with the flavor of the chocolate, since chocolate has such a strong flavor. Speaking of which, I did want to mention that I think the amount of cocoa powder that you use in this chocolate pecan pie recipe is open to your personal taste. A lot of recipes online say to use 4 tablespoons of cocoa powder. I used 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder in my chocolate chess pie, which was very similar to this one. And now that I've tried this pie, I think that somewhere between 2 and 4 tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder is what you should use in this recipe. Like I said, I could definitely taste the pecans, and this was a pecan pie, but with 4 tablespoons of cocoa powder, I think that especially if you do not roast the nuts, this would become more of a chocolate pie that just so happens to have nuts than a nut and chocolate pie, if that makes sense. More cocoa powder will make it less sweet as well. This kind of reminded me of a 65%, maybe 70% cacao chocolate bar. So if you want the nuts to be more pronounced than the chocolate and you want it to be a little more sweeter than a dark chocolate, I would go with 3 tablespoons, maybe even down to 2 tablespoons if you really want this to be a pecan pie with some chocolate in the background. Some other things that I would like to try in this recipe would be some cinnamon, maybe half a teaspoon, a little bit of instant coffee, somewhere between half a teaspoon to a teaspoon, maybe some lemon or orange as well. I saw a few recipes for chocolate pecan pie that called for bourbon, so that is something that would be good as well, I think. Another thing I wanted to mention is that this pie wasn't very thick. If you want the filling to be thicker, then you might want to add another egg and a little bit more sugar and butter. But honestly, for me, I felt like this was fine because this is such a rich pie. I don't want to have the filling to be too thick. I don't mean for my criticism of this recipe to sound harsh, because this really was good. I just think that you have to really like chocolate to really love this. So if you like pecan pie and you like chocolate, this is the best recipe for Thanksgiving or Christmas. If you're looking for a new dessert recipe idea, give this one a try. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.